Hello everybody, this is Tech with Gearhead Gaming, and here in this video I'm going to do two things. I'm going to give a sort of introduction to the rating system that I'm going to use throughout my set review, and I'm also going to review the neutral cards. So let me start off by explaining what sort of my numbers mean when I'm reviewing a card. Here's an example of Baku the Moon Eater, a card that I expect to be pretty significant. I first look at the raw power level of a card, right? And I evaluate it on a scale of 1 stars to 5 stars. And the question that I have when I'm looking at the raw power level is just what is the effect of this card, and is this a card that's good enough for competitive play, right? A 1-star card is garbage. You wouldn't even play it in Arena. A 2-star card is maybe like a good Arena card, but not really something that makes it at the constructed level, right? A Razorfen Hunter might be okay for Arena, but it's not a constructed card. 3 stars is where you get into that point where it's good constructed filler. This is the card that is at that level necessary to be played and constructed, but probably isn't the reason why you're building your deck. It's one of these cards that's rounding out your 30, right? A 4-star card is one of the meat and potatoes of your deck. It's really like, it's more than filler, right? This is part of the reason you play the deck. It might not be the 5-star build around really like, or like a really high power level card like Call to Arms, right? That just has a bunch of inherent value, but it's solid. And with some synergies, it is kind of a 5-star card, right? If it has these good synergies and complements your deck well, then it really does have a 5-star power level when you're playing it. And finally, we have the 5-star power level cards. These cards are doing really good things for their mana cost, really good things for what they're costing, or how many cards they're costing you. They're really impactful at the stage of the game that you're playing them, etc., etc., etc. And so here we have Baku, for example. Baku is essentially saying for 0 mana and no cards, you get to upgrade your hero power at the start of the game. That's a really powerful effect. That is an incredibly powerful effect. You're not spending any cards, you're not spending any mana, and you're getting this fantastic ability, right? Upgrading your hero power is very relevant in almost all the classes, right? So he has a great raw power level. He doesn't have much synergy. That's the next thing I'm going to go into, which is that having an upgraded hero power or a 9-mana 7/8 beast doesn't really offer you a lot in the way of synergies, right? Maybe you care about him being a beast, right? Because every time you play a beast with some other card, you get whatever. That's not really why you're playing Baku, though. Maybe having the upgraded hero power has some relevance because you have like Inspire cards if you're playing Wild, or there's something that matters about your hero power that's relevant. That's not a big thing, at least in the standard card pool. So he doesn't have a lot of synergy, right? The card itself does not benefit a bunch of other cards. He does, however, have very big archetype dependence. He depends upon the other cards in your deck, in this instance, a huge way, right? You have to have a deck that's only odd cost cards. You can't have any even cost cards in it. That's the sort of dependence that you need to set up Baku the Moon Eater. So he's the card you build around. He's not a card that synergizes a bunch of stuff and makes a lot of stuff more powerful. He's the card that other cards make more powerful. You build your deck in a certain way to take advantage of this card, not the other way around. So that's sort of the fine difference between synergy and archetype dependence. And the two blur each other sometimes, because oftentimes that's the way these sort of synergies work. But in this case, it's pretty cut and dry. Baku has high archetype dependence. He really depends upon odd cost decks being powerful for him himself to see a lot of play. Has high archetype dependence. Then we have meta dependence. And meta dependence is sort of whether or not a card is good in an aggro meta or not an aggro meta, in a control meta or not an aggro meta, or not a control meta, or mid-range meta, right? Like, some cards are just going to be good in all these. They're always going to do something relevant in almost all these situations, or they're kind of independent of that. Other cards could be very, very slow or very good at defending, right? A big taunt minion that gains you health is pretty relevant in an aggro meta and not very relevant in a control meta. A very slow card that generates you a bunch of resources, right, but doesn't really impact the board state, is probably pretty weak in an aggro meta, but very strong in a control/mid-range meta. So that's where this meta dependence thing comes in. In my view, having an upgraded hero power isn't really that meta dependent, right? It's probably a little bit better in a longer game where you get to use your hero power a lot more times, but I don't really consider it to be that big of a difficulty in figuring out whether or not you want to play Baku. And then finally, I have the meta significance. And this card is, this stat is a little bit of a mix of all these things. You need to have a high raw power level to be significant, but you also need to be able to be played in decks that are relevant for me to consider you to have a high meta significance, right? If Baku has insane raw power, but a very big archetype dependence, he needs odd cost decks to be a thing to see any play, then if my verdict is that odd cost decks aren't going to see any play, then Baku might have a very low meta significance. Even though he was a very powerful card, he wouldn't see any play because he's a very powerful card in very specific decks that just don't happen to be strong right now. He might see play later, right? The raw power level is probably the best indicator of the chances of a card being played over the course of its 2-year lifetime in a standard, but he might not see play now. I do think in this instance, though, that Baku decks are going to be relevant, and therefore I think his meta significance is pretty high. I'm giving him 6 stars out of 7. And so that's sort of the setup. 1 to 5 scale on raw to power, 1 to 3 scales on synergy, archetype dependence, and meta dependence, and then a 1 to 7 scale on roughly how often I expect to see this guy in the meta. Going from 1 stars, which is I would be very surprised to ever see this guy, to 2 stars, which is maybe a few decks run this as like a fringe card, or some fringe decks run it as like a staple, all the way to like 3 and 4, where like tier 2 decks are running it pretty regularly, or maybe it's a fringe card in tier 1 decks, to 5 and 6 and 7, where like this is a meta-defining card. It's showing up in a bunch of top decks, right? Or like 5 star is kind of like where it's a solid card in a tier 1 deck, a staple, whereas like 6 and 7 is part of what's driving tier 1 decks and forcing other decks to adapt to it. So that's the whole breakdown of these numbers. At a glance, you can probably just look at raw power and meta significance to really have a good idea, but a lot of these set reviews are about explaining things. I think there's a lot of dimensions to whether or not a card is good or bad. A lot of those depend upon the meta. I've tried to capture in these ratings that meta dependence, that finding a home deck dependence, that everything. So hopefully that's helpful. So let's get a little bit into the set review. This time covering neutrals, but with a little bit of introduction. So here is my big top-level predictions for what we'll see in the Witchwood. I think among the tier 1 decks, we will have 3 contenders. We'll have the 2 tier 1 decks that basically didn't lose that much, which are the various warlocks, whether or not they're cube locks or control locks, running Void Lord plus Possessed Lackey. We'll have Dude Paladin, which will probably be some sort of aggro, maybe adjusting itself to be a little bit more mid-range of a deck. And then we'll have Shudderwalk combo. I think Shaman has really found something that works. In particular, works against the Warlocks running Void Lord. It might not be that strong against Dude Paladin, but I think it's going to be very strong against Warlock decks. That's my prediction. And then we have like the tier 1.5 decks. I'm predicting some form of warrior, though I'm not sure what, just because they've been handed so many good cards. I think Zoo Mage also has the pieces to beat it. And then presumably some card that can reliably beat Shudderwalk will make it to tier 1.5 if Shudderwalk makes it to tier 1. This is sort of the pattern of things. You usually have counters to specific decks making up this tier 1.5/tier 2 type thing, where they in particular metas they're good. Right, if you start seeing a bunch of this guy on the ladder, then you might see a lot more play of this deck to beat it. I'm thinking there's going to be some decks that beat Shudderwalk combo reasonably reliably, and as a result, one of the best options of those is going to make the tier 1.5. And then we have some tier 2 decks. Some other form of warrior probably is going to be in here, but I'm thinking Hand Druid will make it to tier 2. Like a Baku Odd Hunter, I think will make tier 2. A mid-range Beast Hunter will make tier 2. I think some variants of the sort of the Dude Paladin, and here I'm putting Even Paladin, or like the again Greymane Paladin, I'm putting it tier 2. Control Mage, I'm thinking is going to be tier 2 as well. I think that losing Ice Block hurts it in a kind of big way. And I have to imagine that something with Alneth is going to make tier 2, even though a lot of the pieces that went together with Alneth are gone, either Hall of Famed or rotated out. Alneth is just such a powerful card that I'm thinking there's going to be some other form of mage besides this sort of Zoo Mage, like Elemental Zoo Mage that I'm seeing that's going to pop up in tier 2. And then we have the sort of the garbage classes of this rotation, which I think are going to be Priest and Rogue. Priest was very strong, and then I think it lost what was necessary to make it work, which was the best parts of its dragon package. It still has Duskbreaker, but without Draconid Operative and without Netherspite Historian, I'm really doubting Priest's ability going forward. And Rogue received almost nothing this expansion, and really didn't have a good deck going into the rotation. Kingsbane Rogue lost some pieces, and Temple Rogue was never really that good after the nerfs. So that's my prediction. Tier 1 is Control Lock, Dude Paladin, Shutterwalk combo. Tier 1.5 decks are a bunch of mostly mid-range decks that are probably finding their feet in a meta where the Warlocks are not the main Tier 1 deck. And then we'll have some Tier 2 decks that I think will pop up because of they've got some nice cards from the set. So on to the neutrals. Let me also preface by saying that most of these neutral cards are going to be very bad. Some of them I'm going to deal with in batches and just say these are all bad. So not every card is going to receive an equal amount of time. I'm going to focus more on cards that I think are relevant. But anyways, here we go. First off, we have Swamp Dragon Egg. I don't think this card's very good, but I see a pattern when reviewing these cards. That there seems to be a lot of like egg synergy type cards. This is literally an egg in this case. And it's not a bad egg. It's 1 mana, 0/3 with a death rattle that generates a resource. That's okay. But I think that this card really doesn't have a place right now. I think maybe after rotation or after some nerfs, Egg Warlock could be a thing. I'm going to give this a meta significance of 2, simply because the desperation for dragons might reach such a pitch that we see Priest or something running this. Like, right, with Lady in White, I don't know, but for now, I'm thinking this card isn't going to be very impactful. Next up, we have Swamp Leech. It's a 1 mana 2/1 with some upside, but that's not really enough. These cards just aren't good enough, even though it is a beast. Lots of good synergies here. This is mainly something you want to pick up off of Deathstalker Rexar. And maybe you like it if it's just a randomly generated thing, but I don't think you voluntarily put this in your deck. It's not at the power level of Constructed. Baleful Banker. A 2 mana 2/2 is bad. 2 mana 2/2 that is a battle cry that doesn't immediately impact the board or do anything like that or generate you a resource is also kind of bad. You're just shuffling a copy of a minion into your deck, which means you probably aren't playing this on turn 2 anyways. It's part of some combo maybe. I think this card's bad. I think unless specifically a combo deck out there wants this card just isn't going to be good. And even if a combo deck wants it, maybe that isn't the best build of the combo deck. Lost Spirit. I mean, this card works with Call to Arms fairly well in what Druid is trying to, not Druid, but Paladin is trying to do with its sort of aggro dude strategy, but it's a 2 mana 1/1. It's hard for me to get really excited about this. This card actually, for me, seems to be yet another card that fits well with eggs, because it makes your eggs able to attack. It's kind of an egg itself, like you want to crack it and get some good stuff. I'm giving it a metagame significance of 2, which again is a little bit generous, kind of like with the Swamp Dragon Egg. 2 stars might have been a little bit generous. I think this one gets to 2, not because it has some dragon synergy, which is what the Swamp Egg kind of pushed it over the edge to 2 stars, but because it potentially is something you work in with Call to Arms. Maybe this is a 2-drop you put in like an even Paladin, where you're maybe scrambling a little bit to find the good stuff. But yeah, I don't think this card is going to be immediately super impactful. I think even if it sees play, it's going to be a replaceable card. Spellshifter, 2 mana 1/4 with spell damage +1. Every turn it's in your hand, swap its attack and health. So this is kind of this Worgen theme that they have going on, where the cards transform. The moon comes out and they turn into Worgens or whatever. There are better options. I mean, a 2 mana 1/4 spell damage +1 is fine. It's pretty good, in fact. But like this is sometimes a 4/1, which is not what you want. And I don't think you have a lot of choice about when you want to play your spell damage stuff. When you need the spell damage, you need the spell damage. So I think there are just better options. I think I'd rather run Thalnos almost all the time if I just want cheap spell damage. Vicious Scalehide. Not a particularly powerful creature in a vacuum, but the fact that it has Lifesteal and Rush, which are both keywords for Countess Ashmore, which we'll see later, and is a beast, means there's potentially a lot of synergy with this card. I think it's easier for neutral cards to have meta significance, which is why this is getting up to 3 stars, even though it isn't really that powerful a card, because they can fit in every deck potentially, right? Whereas class cards can only go in that class. So maybe this is a little bit generous because this card just isn't really at a great power level, but the synergies are pretty strong. And as we'll see later, being able to use Countess Ash more profitably is something that a lot of classes are going to kind of have to consider about what they're going to do. This guy ticks 2 of the boxes for Countess Ashmore, and he's not that bad. Compared to the other options, he might be the best. So I think this guy will see some play as a result, even though individually, in a vacuum, he isn't that powerful. Blackwalled Pixie. 3 mana 3/4 is fair stats. I like it, right? Spider tanks are fine. Battlecry, refresh your hero power. Not that great of an upside. I kind of want to play this with Death Knights and odd decks, ones where my hero power is really impactful, right? Ones where I've got Gul'dan out and I'm hitting my opponent for an extra 3 as a result of this. But outside of those specific scenarios, I don't see why I'd really play this. I think you basically have to be in Death Knight and or an odd deck, and I think it's more likely that you're going to see this get played in odd decks. Maybe like odd mage, where doubling up on Jaina hero power is really important. I don't know. In either case, you need the specific synergies, and it's not that powerful a card even in those decks, so I'm only giving this 2 stars. Hench Clan Thug. It's a 3 mana 3/3. After your hero attacks, give this minion +1/+1. I mean, in rogue decks, this is pretty good. Any deck that can weapon up on 2 pretty reliably. This is sort of like a card that you would include in a Keleseth rogue deck, where you're going to weapon up on 2 pretty much every time that you don't have Keleseth, and then you're going to play this guy on 3, you're going to immediately attack, and this guy's going to become a 4/4. A 3 mana 4/4 with upside is where I want to be in Constructed. And so I think this guy has a very good power level. 4 stars is what I'm giving him. Obviously, you need to put him in a certain type of deck, so that his archetype dependence is very high. I think the reason why this guy isn't rated higher is just because I don't think Rogue is very strong right now. And Rogue seems to be the class that's set up to actually use this guy. If Rogue was stronger, if Keleseth / mid-range Rogue really is a bigger thing, then I think this guy would see a lot of play in those lists. But that's a pretty specific bet, so I'm only giving this guy 2 stars as a result. I just don't think Rogue is there right now. This is another card that's really good in Rogue. 3 mana 5/4 Dragon. Battlecry, summon basically a Pit Viper, a 2/1 poisonous Drake Slayer for your opponent. So you need a way to solve the 2/1 problem. You need a way to kill it. Rogue will reliably have that answer, right? As with the Hench Clan Thug, you can weapon up on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you play your 5/4, and you use your weapon to kill his 2/1, and that's fine, right? It's not super great in a sense, because you don't really want to be weaponing up on 2, but you're going to weapon up on 2 a lot if you're like just a Keleseth deck, and sometimes you don't have Keleseth, right? So the downside there is a little bit negated because you already had, it was like a sunk cost. You probably already had to weapon up on 2 as a Keleseth rogue. So I think also important is that this card is a dragon, and I think priests really would like to see dragons right now. It's frustrating though that Potion of Madness is not a card, because this plus Potion of Madness would have been pretty insane, and maybe in Wild that'll be part of what happens. But with Potion of Madness rotating out, you don't have like a good way to just play this easily. Maybe you pick it up as a Desperation Dragon for a priest, but I don't think priest is a good answer to the 2/1 poisonous right now. So I'm giving this a low meta significance because I think both priest and rogue are in a bad spot. I don't think this fits priest terribly well, and I think that I don't think that Keleseth rogue is going to be a big thing. So I'm giving this a small significance. Nightmare Amalgam. Well, if you're digging for dragons, here's one of them. It's a spider tank dragon. Maybe this is what priest turns to. I mean, I don't know, but it's a poor replacement for Draconid Operative. I'll say that. It does very nicely though survive Duskbreaker the next turn, right? So that's not bad. So it does generate some significance here, even if it dies to every anti-tribal tech card that exists, right? Everything that eats pirates or eats beasts or eats dragons or murlocs or whatever is gonna, right? Anything that kills demons is gonna work against this guy. But I don't know. I don't expect to see a whole lot of that. And maybe you're just so desperate for dragons that you play this guy, even though he's really nothing special. That alone gives him a meta significance of 2 in my mind. Phantom Militia. I mean, it's a pretty boring card, honestly. I don't think that this is really what you want to be doing. If you're playing against an aggro deck, then you want to be playing this guy on turn 3 to try and save yourself as quickly as possible. And he's not very good value in that case. And right, there are better things you can be doing on 3 as an anti-aggro measure. And against control decks, saving this guy up for turn 9 really isn't that valuable. Okay, you get 3 2/4s. That's fine. It isn't really going to do anything, though, right? These guys aren't going to punch through Void Lords anytime soon. So unless there's some way of reducing the cost of this card, right, with like a summoning portal type effect, I think these Echo cards are just, they're not very good. They're not at the constructed level. Pumpkin Peasant. It has lifesteal, which makes it relevant for Countess Ashmore. I don't think it's a very good card, though. It's fine in Arena. It's not for constructed. Ravencaller. I mean, maybe this goes into like an odd quest hunter, like a Baku quest hunter. I could see that happening, but even there they might have better options. And I'm not really sure that deck is that great. That's pretty specific. Outside of that, I mean, I would think that adding 2 random 1-cost minions to my hand is probably about as good as drawing a card. Like drawing 1 whole card is probably worth 2 random 1-cost minions. And a 3-mana 2/1 draw card is a little bit under the power level that I want for constructed. So I'm not super impressed with this guy. I think he has like a specific deck that he might go in, but I'm not excited for anything else. Tangle Fur Mystic. I think this card actually will see play. I think it'll see play specifically in Hand Druid, because the game plan of Hand Druid is going to be to play a 2-drop or a 2-cost card that either generates another card in your hand or ramps your mana. So they're going to be playing things like Wild Growth, things like Wrath, which can, in the alternate mode, draw you a card. They're going to be playing like Tortall Forager, and they're going to want to follow that up with a 3-drop that generates them a card. Ferocious Howl was printed for Druids, and this card could show up in those lists as well. You're going to add a random 2-cost minion to your hand. You mainly care about this did not cost you a card from your hand. That way on turn 4, you can start doing your crazy stuff. And that's going to be the progression. It's going to be turn 2, play something that replaces itself. Turn 3, play something that replaces itself. Turn 4, do your good stuff. And I think this card has a spot in that instance. Its power level is not that great, though. I think it's really... the fact that it has this very narrow, specific synergy that makes it significant. But because I think that it is, I think that Hand Druid is going to see some play, and I think this card is what Hand Druid is trying to do. I'm giving it 3 stars. But yeah, the power level is not great, right? Because it's a symmetric effect, and this is just a vanilla statted body. Voodoo Doll. I think this card has very high meta significance. I think in a lot of decks, this card is going to be 3-mana destroy minion of your choice, right? Because you're going to finish this guy off with Jaina Ping, or you're going to Dark Pact it, or you're going to Defile, or you're going to do one of these million of other ways that you have for sacking your creatures. And this guy is an egg that you play in non-egg decks, because there's just so many good things you can do with him. Really strong. I expect this card to see a good amount of play. I think he'll wax and wane a little bit based on the meta, and obviously you need a way to sack this guy to really make him good, right? You need a way to destroy him yourself. You don't want to like wait a turn, so he is kind of dependent upon the deck. But I think there are enough decks out there that can do that this guy's going to see play and be strong. I already gave my review of Phantom Militia. This is basically the same thing. Here it's instead of a 3-mana 2/4 with taunt, it's a 3-mana 3/3. I'm not going to use this guy. I just need, like, there's no scenario in which this guy really does anything that powerful and constructed unless his mana cost gets reduced or there's some other bonus thing going on here. He's just not good enough. Witch's Cauldron. Kind of like a Cult Master, but instead of drawing you cards, it puts random shaman spells into my hand. I'm actually kind of high on random shaman spells. A lot of that is like good removal and stuff, but it's a 0/4 for 3 mana. That's a pretty bad stat line. Its own death doesn't count, kind of like the same as Cult Master. I need to trade in a board to get these random shaman spells now. I don't think this card's very good. I'm not going to work hard to get random shaman spells to my hand, plain and simple. So I don't think the power level is high enough, and I don't think there's enough synergies to play this card in really any decks. I give it 1 star. Falso Inquisitor. It's a 1/6 for 4. I mean, that, unless this text is really good, is it really good? I mean, it's lifesteal and taunt. That's okay, but it's a demon. No one cares about demons except for the deck that doesn't want it to be a demon because it was trying to pull better stuff with Possessed Lackey. This card's 1 star. Obviously, like a decent Lady in White / Inner Fire target, and is potentially something you pull with Ashmore. But I think there are better options. Life Drinker. I think this card's fair on its own. A 4 mana 3/3 is not a good body. You're giving up, compared to a vanilla minion like a Chillwind Yeti, you're giving up 3 stats. But you're gaining, restoring 3 health, right? Which is pretty decent. And you're dealing 3 damage to the enemy hero. That's kind of fair. Not a great power level, but an acceptable power level sometimes. I think where this card really gets significant, the reason why I'm giving it 5 stars is because it's probably the best way to turn Shudderwalk into an OTK. And I think you're going to be running this in your Shudderwalk combo decks a lot, and I think that's where it's going to show up. Because I think that deck is going to be tier 1, I'm giving this a meta significance of 5. Even though the power level is a little bit low, I think that it has a specific synergy with a tier 1 deck. It helps make a tier 1 deck, honestly, so I'm giving it a bunch of stars. Mad Hatter. I mean, this is another like eggs deck, right? Imagine you have a board full of eggs and you play this guy, and now your eggs get to crack themselves. That's pretty good. Interestingly, if you just play this guy, I mean, with you having the only other minion, he's not that bad, right? I mean, he's 4 mana 6/5 worth of stats. Setting up that board is going to be really hard, though. I mean, I think it depends a lot on the meta of whether or not this guy's good. That's what it comes down to. If you can reliably play this guy on like turn 4, and you be the only guy with minions in play, then he's pretty good, right? If you can't do that, then you're in trouble, because this guy just gets stuck in your hand, and the more turns he's stuck in the hand, the more likely it is that you're unable to play him, and you just never get value from him, and it sucks. So I'm only giving this guy 2 stars. I think like there's some interesting stuff you can do with it, but like all these sort of cards that I feel would go really well in an eggs deck, I don't think the eggs deck is there yet, so I'm only giving it 2 stars. Night Prowler. Night Prowler is kind of the same story. It's a 4 mana 6/6 in the right meta. You have to be in that right meta, though, right? You can't be in a different meta. And I don't know if we're going to be in that meta. I could see this guy seeing some play, particularly with a deck that has like a weapon that it plays on turn 3, right? That is just clearing creatures and then playing this. I could see that. This guy is an interesting follow-up also to Doomsayer, so maybe he shows up in sort of control decks. I see potential for this guy. I don't know where he goes yet, and I think it also just really depends on the meta, right? There are going to be metas where this guy would never be able to get his Battlecry off, and that's right. You can't play him in that meta. I think there are going to be some metas where you do get this Battlecry off, though. So I'm giving him 2 stars on spec. I don't know where he goes yet, or if this is the time for him, but he's probably going to have some time somewhere down the road. Sandbinder. This card doesn't look special. It's a 4 mana 2/4 that draws you a card. So it looks like Gnomish Inventor. Why not just play Gnomish Inventor, you might ask? Well, you might care about specifically tutoring an elemental from your deck, right? Drawing an elemental from your deck might be more valuable than just drawing a random card, because that elemental might be critical for your combo, right? This guy helps you assemble Shudderwalk combo because almost all the pieces are elementals. This guy works with some other cards, Dollmaster Dorian, Aragal, where you care about the next card that you draw and you want it to be a minion. I mean, in particular, the scenario that I saw was you put Aragal and Pyros in your deck, and then you get to get a second copy of Pyros, or you get to Dollmaster Dorian, that Pyros that you draw, and then suddenly you have just this insane value that you're generating. So even though the card doesn't look that special, raw power level, I'm putting it 3 stars, which is maybe a little bit generous. I think it has meta significance because I think elementals are relevant in at least 2 decks. One of them is a combo deck, one of them is like this would be a value card. That's my take on it. But yeah, the archetype dependence is important here because you have to care about elementals, I think. Maybe really I should have put the synergy high. It's kind of a little bit fuzzy which of the two of these is, but you need to care about drawing an elemental from your deck more than you care about drawing a card from your deck for this guy to see play, because otherwise you would just play Gnomish Inventor. Gnomish Inventor isn't that powerful of a card. So that's what's going on here. That's the reason why this guy gets 4 stars. I think specifically he pulls combo pieces for Shuttlewalk combo out of your deck, and you care about that a lot, so you run this guy. Next up we have Scale Worm. It's a powerful card. A 4-mana 5/4 with Rush is good, is very good. It's a beast as well, so it has some synergy there. But not a lot of decks are going to be running dragons, I feel. Priest might try it because they still have Duskbreaker, but none of the other classes really have a lot of compelling reasons to run dragons, and not a lot of great dragons to run, honestly. I mean, there's a few released in the set, but overall, I'm not excited about dragons. And so this guy's a powerful card, but his time hasn't come yet. Swift Messenger. I don't think the power level of this card is that great. It's 4 mana, deal 6 to a minion, but only half the time. That's not screaming to me like I'm great, but the fact that it's basically removal, because you're going to play this when it flips. You're going to play this as a 6/2 with Rush, and you're going to deal 6 damage to something. A 4 mana deal 6 to a minion in neutral seems pretty like it seems like it's going to find a place somewhere. It has synergy with Countess Ashmore, and I think some decks are going to turn to this as the Rush minion that they keep in their deck. That way Ashmore gets good value. So I see this card seeing some play. I don't think it's going to be like a meta-defining card of any sort, but I think that some decks are going to turn to her, and they're going to think that she's okay and not much more than that. That's my take on it. Unpowered Steambot. It's a 4 mana 0/9 with Taunt. I think the obvious connection here is that they want us to play this in like a Lady in White deck where this guy is in your deck and gets interfired, and then I don't know, you guild recruiter him out. But just on his own, his power level is really low. We've seen 2 mana 0/7 taunts that didn't see play at all. So what hope does this guy have when he costs 2 mana more and only gives you 2 extra stats? You really have to care about some sort of Divine Spirit Interfire thing, I think, to play this guy. Or like you have some consistent way of buffing your taunt minions, like you're a taunt druid or something. I don't know, but either way, I don't expect to see this guy very often, except in some meme decks, so I'm giving him 1 star. Witchwood Piper. I mean, it's kind of a tutor effect. It's 4 mana, 6 stats, draw a card. That's fine. Though typically, drawing the lowest cost minion from your deck is worse than just drawing a card, because you want to be drawing like your high cost, impactful stuff later on in the game. Like, do you want to draw 1 drop from your deck? With that said, there are some interesting things you can do to like buff 1 drops. We've seen Dire Frenzy with Hunter, so you buff a Stone Tusk Boar, for example, and then voila, you pull the Stone Tusk Boar out of your deck with a Witchwood Piper, and it's insane. There's some interesting things you can do with this. So I'm going to say that it's not a 1-star card, but it's not quite with like Sandbinder, where I could see the relevance of it, and so I gave it more significance. Here I don't know what it does. And because I don't know what it does, I think it's less relevant. I think eventually it will see some play, probably, in specific instances, but I'm not sure we're even in one of those instances at the moment, so maybe an expansion down the road. Chief Inspector. Here's our way of destroying secrets. 5 mana 4/6 is not really the body I wanted to see on a Destroy All Enemy Secrets card, but I'll take it because we'll probably need it at some point. It's a solid tech card to the extent where, I don't know, like Spiteful Priest or Spiteful anything is still a deck. This is one of these tech minions that you'll toss in there along with your Spiteful package. I expect this card to see play at some point. Obviously, it depends a lot on the meta. In a meta without secrets, this card isn't very good. But yeah, this card is fine. It's not a great body, not really the mana cost that I wanted to see on this effect, but it's what you got, so you're going to play it whenever secrets are big and bad and you don't want to run up against them. Clockwork Automaton, 5 mana 4/4, bad stat line, but double the damage and healing of your hero power seems pretty good. assuming you have a strong hero power, which is quite possible in like a Baku deck, where your hero power deals 3 damage to your opponent's face or deals 2 damage to something on their board or whatever, right? I'm not giving it very much significance because it requires specific Baku decks basically to work. I mean, maybe some Death Knights will work with it. And a 5 mana 4/4 means that I really need to have the synergy because just in terms of raw power, this isn't very good. But I could see it showing up in some Baku decks, so I'm going to give it 2 stars. I think this is kind of a fringe card, though. Like, I don't think this is the reason you play a Baku deck necessarily. I don't think it's going to be like a combo finisher or something, and so it's not getting more than 2 stars from me. But it's going to see some play. Maybe it deserves 3 stars. I don't know. Dollmaster Dorian. I mean, a 5 mana 2/6 with this ability just in a vacuum isn't very good, but we've seen some cards printed that specifically seem to work with this guy really well. The Aragal Zoo that I talked a little bit about with Sandbinder. Basically, there are a lot of ways to draw minions from your deck. An obvious one that I don't think will be lost on people is just Sense Demons plus Void Lords. You play Dollmaster Dorian, and you play Sense Demons, and voila, you get 2 1/1 copies of Void Lord, which will then death rattle to a bunch of Void Walkers. Things of that sort that also just improve your pool for Gul'dan, probably, right? They seem strong, right? You could potentially have a Warlock deck that doesn't actually run Void Lords, that instead is pulling Doom Guards and then looking to OTK with Gul'dan, summoning 6 Doom Guards because you have got these 1/1 copies of Doom Guard off of Dollmaster Dorian. Maybe you faceless some, whatever. Either way, this card doesn't seem to, like, I don't think this is, just in terms of raw power level, is that good. The stat line's bad. You need to draw minions in order for it to really do anything. You're only getting 1/1 copies, whatever. But like the synergies are there. The synergies, I think, are just smacking us in the face. And so I'm going to give them meta significance of 4. I think a lot of tiered decks are going to play around with this guy, and some of them might find that he's part of the optimal build. That's my prediction. Muck Hunter, 5 mana 5/8, great stat line. Rush, nice. Battle Cry, summon 2/2/1 Mucklings for your opponent. Well, that's a downside, because then this becomes like a 5/4 rush. Maybe not even that, because maybe you have to use this guy to attack a Muckling. To the extent you have a way of dealing with the Mucklings, or maybe even turning them to your advantage with something like Unleash the Hounds, I think this card becomes very good, right? Like, I can imagine Muck Hunter in a deck that also runs Sea Giant. I can imagine Muck Hunter in decks that have cheap weapons that can deal 1 damage. Imagine Muck Hunter in whatever, a deck with Whirlwind effects, because the body's quite good. A 5 mana 5/8 with Rush is fantastic. It's just a matter of dealing with that downside, and I don't know. I think there are enough decks that can deal with that. I think there are enough ways to deal with the downside of these 2/1 Mucklings that I'm actually going to assign this 4 stars and say it's pretty good. And I think that there are going to be some like Countess Ashmore decks that'll say this is the rush minion that I want to pair with Ashmore. Rotten Apple Bomb. I don't think this card's very good. I think the raw power level is pretty low. 5 mana 4/5 taunt. It's not really what I want to be doing. Death Rattle, restore 4 health to my hero. This card would have been insane when N'Zoth was around, because this is exactly what N'Zoth decks are trying to do. This is the card that helps you stabilize on the turn that you play N'Zoth. As it is, this is like a fair tech card against aggro. I will see some play as a tech card against aggro. Maybe it deserves more than 2 stars. But I really think it's dependent upon an aggro meta, which we might not have, and it's not even that good. Like it's understated. I don't like this card. I'm not a fan of it. I think I'll pass, and I'll pass almost specifically because this next card, Witchwood Grizzly, seems like the better card, right? Against aggro, this card looks like it'll be pretty insane. It's a 5 mana 3/12 taunt. Great. A battle cry, lose 1 health for each card in your opponent's hand. Well, if your opponent only has like 2 cards in their hand because they're an aggro deck, guess what? It's a 3/10 taunt for 5 mana. Yeah, I'll take it. Like that's fantastic. Hopefully one of the last two cards in their hand isn't a quality or something. But other than that, I'm super happy with this. And there are going to be times you'll play this as a 3/9 and it'll be fine, or 3/8 for 5 mana and you'll still be happy with it. And there are going to be times you play this as a 3/12 and then your opponent's just like, wow, this blanks my entire turn and probably kills a bunch of my minions. I think this card is the neutral anti-aggro tech card that you'll be running these days. I don't think it's Apple Bomb. I think it's this guy. I think this is part of the reason I gave Apple Bomb 2 stars in the meta significance was because this guy exists. Otherwise, Apple Bomb might be like 3 stars. I think this is the card. I think because it's a neutral and because it's something you're probably going to run in any meta where aggro is the thing to beat, I'm giving this guy 5 stars. Great power level, very relevant in particular metas. It's a tech card. It's a great tech card. I expect to see this play. Now we have Gen Greymane. This is the other version of the Baku type thing. Start of your game, if your deck has only even cost cards, your starting hero power costs 1. The downside of this is your starting hero power costs 1, right? Does not work with Death Knights. You can't. Your Death Knight will change the hero power, and the Death Knight hero power won't cost 1. That's my understanding. Nonetheless, I think this is a card you might see in an even Paladin. Paladin seem to be the deck that I think is going to make evens work, because Call to Arms plus 2 drops plus Sunkeeper Tarim plus, right, like maybe Tyrion Fordring, maybe plus, I don't know, Crystal Lion. There's so many cards that Paladin has on the even costed thing that Gen Greymane could just show up. And then turn 1, you're going to make a dude. Turn 3, you're going to make a dude plus make a 2-drop, right? Turn 5, you're going to play your second Call to Arms plus make a dude, destroy your opponent. I don't know. I don't know if that's the best build of things. I think that there's fewer opportunities for this guy, but I think the power level, like Baku, is just really high. Spending no cards, spending no mana, and getting to upgrade your hero power at the start of the game is a really powerful effect. It's just a question of whether or not you can build the deck that's good enough, right, to not just throw away all that advantage right back. And I'm rating this lower than Baku because I think there's fewer opportunities. I'm still giving it 5 stars, though. I'm thinking this will be the backbone. This will be, the defining card, essentially, of a tier 2 deck, at least. That's my take on it. And that, for me, is good enough to get 5 stars. So, Gen Greymane, not as good as Baku, I think, but still a real deal. Mossy Horror. This card seems kind of good. It's Shadowward Horror, which is a 4-mana card, and seemed like a pretty fair, good 4-mana card on a body. You could think about it in the sense of you're paying 2 mana to get a 2/7. I think the trick is that it's not as good as that because Shadowward Horror is a lot less relevant on turn 6. Turn 6, the aggro decks that you're trying to kill with Shadowward Horror probably have already killed you. If not, they might have buffed their dudes with, Sunkeeper Tarim, or they might have. There's a bunch of things they could have done to bring their stuff out of Mossy Horror range. Mossy Horror itself doesn't have taunt, so if you leave up some big minions after killing a bunch of their small stuff, they still might just kill you. I don't know. Shadowward Horror on a stick sounds good, but Shadowward Horror loses a lot of its value the later you play it, I feel. And as a result, I'm really not sold on this. Maybe this is something you pair with Curse of Weakness with Warlock or some other effect like this, right? And Mossy Horror ends up being yet another mass removal card. But the problem is you can't pair it with too many Curse of Weaknesses, right? You could, on turn 10, potentially play 2 Curse of Weaknesses, lower the attack of all your opponent's stuff by 4, and then play Mossy Horror to wipe them out. Do you really care about having a 2/7 though? I don't know. Just playing Twisting Nether, right? I don't know. In any case, the power level's okay. I think it's going to depend a lot upon the meta and whether or not there are a lot of other minions with 2 or less attack on turn 6. We're really just going to have to wait and see whether or not turn 6 Mossy Horror is an impactful play. And so I'm going to give it 3 stars because it's a neutral, because it just has enough power, I think, to see play in the right meta. I just don't know if we're in that meta right now. I'm guessing no is the thing. as only Soul Thief. I think this card's very overrated. I've seen a lot of people think this card is like the devil. Oh, it's Divine Favor, but a neutral, and it's, I mean, I don't know. It's a 7 mana Divine Favor. It gives you a 3/3. You're I don't, like, part of the problem with Divine Favor when I'm playing Paladin against, say, Warlock, is that I play my Divine Favor, but the fact that I spent a turn playing Divine Favor and refilling my hand, the fact that I even took 3 mana off from pressuring my opponent means I lose, because he plays more Void Lords. He doesn't care that I have more resources. He wouldn't even care if I stole a bunch of Void Lords from him out of his hand. He wouldn't care if I stole Gul'dan out of his hand. He knows he's going to win if the game goes 2 more turns. Spending 7 mana to get his control hand, one that isn't very good at pressuring and closing out the game, doesn't seem like it's going to win me anything. I don't know. I think you have to be in a very specific meta with a very specific deck for this card to be any useful at all. And I don't see that happening. So I'm giving this only 2 stars, which is pretty low considering I've given a lot of very marginal cards 2 stars. Maybe this is like a 2.5 stars, whereas those cards were 1.5 stars, but I'm still going to lump them together. I think this card's very overrated. Countess Ashmore, this card isn't overrated, though. This might be one of the most impactful cards of the set. I mean, it's probably just 7 mana, 6/6, draw 3. That's crazy value. It's Curator, but better, because Curator had sort of odd requirements. Like, getting a dragon was fine. A beast, depending upon the class, was fine. Then, like, throwing in a Murloc, you just had these random Murlocs sometimes. Like, Murlocs just didn't work very well with stuff. Here, drawing a Rush, Lifesteal, and Death Rattle. The Death Rattle's free. It's like the dragon from Curator. You're always going to find a good Death Rattle no matter what class you're playing, I think. A Rush minion you might need to dig a little bit more for. Maybe you're playing the 1/3 Lifesteal guy. Maybe you're playing Muck Hunter. Maybe you're just playing Swift Messenger just for like 6 damage, right? Because she'll flip the turn after you play Countess Ashmore, so she's kind of like guaranteed to be the fireball the turn after you play Countess Ashmore. If you're playing Warrior or something like that, you probably have access to a lot of other really good Rush minions. If you're playing Hunter, this is drawing you a Hunting Mastiff, probably. That Hunting Mastiff might have been buffed with Dire Frenzy, and now you're really off to the races, because now you're playing 20 power worth of stuff on turn 8 after you play Countess Ashmore. There's so many good uses for this card. I think you have to basically be a mid-range deck, but I think almost all mid-range decks are going to look at to utilize Countess Ashmore as a big value win condition type card. I think there's a lot of synergy here. Even when you're only drawing 2 cards with her, right? She's still going to be good, because the 2 cards that you're drawing are probably going to be fantastic. Yeah, I think this card is a 7-star card. I think it's huge. It's going to define a lot of decks. It's going to be in a lot of mid-range decks. I think mid-range decks are going to be very much a thing going forward, because I think that Warlock's going to become a little bit weaker. And I'm really happy with this card. Interestingly, it might even have relevance in things like Control Warlock, because cards like Lesser Amethyst Spellstone are lifesteal cards. They're not minions, right? But they are lifesteal cards. This will draw you a lifesteal card and a Void Lord, presumably, or a Possessed Lackey, or a Cube or something, right? Like, this card's good. This card fits into a lot of decks. It's really strong. Craft your copy today. Now we have some cards that are less good. And here's 4 cards that I'm just calling unplayable jank. They're all bad. These cards are all bad. Cards are all garbage. I don't even want to explain why. They're garbage. They're understated. Their effects are weak, or they don't have effects. They're like not much different from vanilla minions. They're horrible. Don't play these. These cards are mostly unplayable jank. These cards are better, but I'm not better enough for me to give them 2 stars and make them into like not bottom of the barrel. Worgen Abomination, you probably just want to play Primordial Drake. Wormguard, again, Dragon Packages got a lot worse. I'm not even sure you really care about this as like a payoff card for a Dragon deck. Gilnean Royal Guard, I think you play this only as like an Ashmore target. It doesn't do enough for 8 mana, honestly. Like, it curves you, but I don't know. I'd probably rather just play Swift Messenger, because I don't know if I care about leaving an 8/3 on the board after removing a minion. And Splitting Festeroot seems like one card that does 3 Death Rattles. So maybe it helps with Awaken the Makers as a quest. There are probably better things to do, though. So all these cards I'm going to rate as 1 star. I don't think they're relevant. If I was generous, I might give them 2 stars, but they're really like 1.5 stars tops. Mostly unplayable jank. And finally, we have the card that I showed at the start, Baku the Moon Eater. 9 mana, 7/8. Start of your game, if your deck has only odd cost cards, upgrade your hero power. He's also a beast, in case that matters. Just a more powerful card, I feel, and with more options than Gen. So Gen, I rated at 5 stars. Still a powerful card, still going to see some relevance, still probably somewhere in rotation is going to be powerful. This guy I'm going to say is even better than Gen. And I think both cards, Gen and Baku, are going to become better as the card pool expands because you're going to have more options for crafting your odd/even cost deck. Right now it's really restrictive because instead of having, say, 7 sets to choose from, you really only have 5. You have this set, the classic set, and the 3 ones that haven't rotated out. When you add sets to that, you loosen the restriction a little bit, and these cards become more relevant. I see relevant decks for Baku right away, though. I see maybe Odd Mage. I'm not sold on that, but more importantly, Odd Hunter and Odd Warrior, an Odd Quest Warrior probably. And I think Baku's going to find some tier 2 spots right away, and maybe over time climb to tier 1 as more cards are released. That's my take on Baku. And that's the last card of the set, if I'm not mistaken. And so that concludes everything. Next up in the playlist is my class card set reviews, where I go a little bit into more detail on the archetypes that I expect to see from each class. Here I've kind of talked about archetypes when I've seen a card that's relevant to a particular archetype, or where you really have sort of an unexpected rating because I think the card fits with a certain thing. In those class set reviews, I will go more into detail as to what I think those will be, and hopefully elucidate why Sandbinder is maybe like a 4-star meta significant card as opposed to just a 2. Hope that helps, and I'll see you later.